Amnesty International's latest human rights report says wealthy states colluded with corporate giants in 2021 to dupe people with empty slogans and false promises of a fair recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, while many people from Africa were denied life-saving vaccines. Amnesty says this amounts to one of the greatest betrayals of our time. Now, efforts in countries such as Somalia, South Africa, Zambia, Senegal and Sierra Leone to stem the tide of COVID-19 were hindered by the global vaccine inequality that was created by pharmaceutical companies and the wealthy nations, according to this Amnesty report. Let's speak more about it. We're joined by Amnesty International South Africa Executive Director Shenilla Mohamed. Shenilla, welcome back to Newzroom Afrika. So, much of what this report says is what many people were saying a year ago at the start of the availability of COVID-19 vaccines. Give us an idea of how bad you found it to be.
Afternoon, Temekile, and good afternoon to your viewers. Well, Temekile, in answer to your question, I mean, if I just start off by saying that only 8% of people on the African continent, of Africans, received vaccinations by the end of 2021. So that should tell you just how bad it was. And I think, the whole issue of states colluding with these big corporates and pharmaceutical companies really played itself out throughout 2021. And, it showed us how some lives matter more than others. It really showed us how inequality is just so deeply entrenched globally. And, what should have been a year of recovery and really, all the world coming together to fight this pandemic really became once again a year of inequality, a year of human rights violations, particularly for people on the African continent, and a year of richer nations showing us their true colors about, who they are and how they colluded with corporates in order to keep poorer nations without the really critically needed vaccinations during COVID-19.
And one of the refrains during the COVID-19 pandemic, when the issue of vaccine hoarding was brought up, the Western nations were using as a defense the fact that the pharmaceutical companies were Western and that many of these governments had made some form of contribution to the development of these vaccines. Is that a fair argument to make?
Well, we were in the middle of a crisis, Temekile. We were in the middle of a pandemic. When you're in the middle of a crisis or a pandemic, it's about life-saving, it's about emergency. But actually, our lives in Africa didn't seem to matter that much. And let's not forget that they made a huge profit. By the end of 2021, 53 billion is what these pharmaceutical companies made on these COVID-19 drugs. So let's not kid ourselves that this was really about lives. This was about money. This was about nationalism. This was about some lives matter more than others. And this was really about the failure of leadership and states. Our governments really let us down and did not fight hard enough for us to get what we required. But, at the end of the day, I think that it's really also about the inequalities that were there before COVID-19. They just became starker and they became even worse during 2021.
And you've said that COVID-19 should have been a decisive wake-up call to deal with poverty and inequality. Why do you think it wasn't?
Well, I think it wasn't because, the fact that corporates and governments colluded. But I also think that, when you look, when we're talking about vaccines, Temekile, we're not just talking about the fact that it saved people's lives or it could have the potential to save people's lives. There was a potential, in a way, a fallout from the fact that only 8% of Africans were actually vaccinated. So if you look at the impact it had on our education system. So in South Africa alone, we found that, there was a threefold dropout rate. So, 270,000 children fell out during last year of school, which is, 3 times more than they did before COVID. In Congo, all over Africa, we found that, kids were dropping out of schools. We also saw the impact on our health systems. People were dying of COVID. Our health systems became totally unable to deal with the burdens. So by these selfish acts by these countries and by the, most of the global community, Africa really had a double, triple impact, because not only were we dealing with death and loss, we were dealing of a total erosion of existing infrastructure, which was already not that great to start off with.
How great is the risk then that many of the African countries may in fact never recover from the impact of COVID?
Well, I think, the risk is that countries that were already, dealing with economic crisis ahead of COVID or before COVID have been thrown even deeper into this crisis. I mean, we see in South Africa alone that, the IMF, South Africa is taking loans. There's the same situation in other parts of Africa. We have seen that schools and other institutions have really become dysfunctional. And I think it's going to take a long time for Africa to really recover from the fallout of what happened globally with regards to the fact that, what should have been the world coming together to fight a pandemic became about rich and poor, became about people on one continent versus another continent. And I think, for us at Amnesty International, this was a horrendous year when it came to human rights, Thembekile. And, really, I think the only shining light, to be frank with you, in 2021 was the way in which people fought back. The fact that people still took to the streets, the fact that people still tried to demand their rights even under these horrendous conditions. And I think that, again, we need to take that forward into 2022. 2021 showed us what poor leadership we have globally. We need to now start to fight for the leadership that is going to really take care of the human rights and the needs of the people on this continent and in South Africa.
Shenilla Mohamed, Executive Director at Amnesty International South Africa. Always good to speak to you. Thank you.